Okay, so we're live now, right? Okay, all right. Thanks for joining. I think there's just like a handful of things that we want to demo from the sprint. This one might be hopefully a shorter one. Um, yeah. Let's see. On the docket, do you want to go first, Ruben?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Do you want to screen share but turn all of your audio off?
Yeah, all my audio is off. So let's see. Hold on. Screen share. All right.
All right.
Yeah. So this sprint, one of the things that we wanted to do was bring back, or was to make it so that you could actually go into the artifact pages to see additional content or additional content, additional metrics for the individual artifacts that make up a project. So we can actually take a look at this. So there is now a known bug. So we're going to encounter that right now because I'm about to wake up the database. So yeah, if you're using the website, the database currently idles.
You can turn that off. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, but right now, while yeah. See, so this is what happens. I'm gonna try it once more.
Okay.
It should be good this time. Let's go to Uniswap because that'll be cool. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Oh, that's actually faster than I expected.
Yeah.
The week on land.
Yeah.
The week on request.
Yeah. It's not bad. It's just that our front end doesn't
Will
make
fail.
the timeout well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an issue in for that. So
That's actually surprisingly fast. You just did a reload and it worked?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think it's something like within like a 30-second time, like it'll actually start out, which is incredible.
I mean, the other thing that we can do
Um,
is like change the horizontal scaling
mhm.
because instead of like going to idle, you can have it just go down to min CPU and min
Mhm.
memory,
Oh,
right? It dynamically scales between like 2 CPUs and 30 CPUs right now.
oh, interesting. Okay,
So
Yeah.
we could just pay like the minimum
and then
tier all the
Yeah,
time
yeah,
with no
yeah.
idle.
That could be useful. Yeah. So okay. So it did. Yeah. Interestingly enough, it did take a minute to run this query. Um, but yeah. So when you are in the project pages, we have not wired together the contract only because there's actually currently nothing to show. We haven't finished that model there for contracts. But if you were to go to repos, you can see all the repo artifacts, and you can click on one of these bad boys. They are not ordered in any specific ways. They are just, whatever is from the database. And then you can actually see metrics for each of these artifacts. Now, in the future, you might notice that the graphs have disappeared. We are bringing those back. We just are doing some refactoring still. Right now.
Sorry about that.
But yeah, that's it for this one. I mean, some cool things about this, I guess, for us on the inside is I changed how these cards are rendered. So let's just go over that really quick. Telling Carl abstractly about this yesterday. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So if you go to the code metrics, which I've already, oh yeah, this is around with something. These cards are now rendered as a repeated horizontal stack. So, and then this data is fed in to this one abstract component, just using this dot code summary, which just includes title, the value, and subtitle. So it'll automatically render,
It's an array.
Yeah, an array of.
Oh, okay. Instead of passing in the raw object,
Yeah.
you censor it.
Exactly.
An array.
Yeah,
Cool.
that way I can do it for both project and for artifact page.
Yeah,
Use the
that
exact
makes
same thing.
sense.
So
That does make more sense.
this is just real quick. Yeah, if you look at this one, so this is the one. This is the one part that I'm like not so sold on with some of the Plasmic stuff is just writing code in here. But yeah, that's how we did it. So I created a special function to
Summarize for cards.
yeah, it was very specific. But for now, that's what I wanted to do. Basically, it's just a way to take a list of like some returned metrics, um, which is expected to be a list or an array, and then do some kind of aggregation function on
Why
it.
don't you just do a server side and then pipe it in?
So I also considered that. Wait, this is server side. Sorry. It's the transformation just doesn't happen server side. So
Yeah, why don't
yeah.
the transformation?
Oh yeah. I was thinking about that. I was wondering if
Like, isn't that how you would have done it if you didn't use Plasmic?
correct. So I was wondering, yeah. So this was one of those things where I am curious if this is if I wanted to allow the aggregation only for like maybe the designer of the page wants to do a different aggregation, but that seemed maybe superfluous, but I wasn't sure. So I
So
wanted to
you-
maintain the current paradigm where we're doing
Do
or
you
at
want
least
to
making that choice.
continue?
Yeah.
You wanted to can you keep piping in the raw data and then leave it to
I'll
the
leave-
studio user? To
Exactly.
write?
That was the current thought, but yeah, I guess I think I would prefer to do the transformation server side so that there's basically little to no like front end like coding.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay.
I think that's fine.
All right. Yeah.
That
I
was
mean,
perfectly
I think
fair.
when Carl and I were talking about this yesterday, he was also well. You're somewhere in between with that, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you want to be.
Like, how often would you really need the the designer to be changing this?
It's more about like when we're in it, you have to jump between the two contexts,
Right.
and yeah, and then like deploy and wait, and then the feedback loop is slow if you're trying to edit that. That's isn't really.
But you would only need to edit it if you're changing the schema.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
If you're not changing the schema, then it doesn't really.
I don't think so. No. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think my preference would be to do it all server side.
I think my preference is to leave more code in the code base, and part of the reason for that is that it can be quite difficult right now in Plasmic to find things.
Yes,
Like
It's-
I wouldn't know where to look for that. If,
absolutely.
you
Yeah.
just show me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like all hidden in this like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'm glad we went over this. So, yeah. Yeah, it's easy enough to do the transformation on the server side. So I do think that is something I'll do for
And then you wouldn't need to register the function.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's a bit bike sheddy, so I don't want to be.
No. I mean,
Too
it's
opinionated
easy
about
enough to move that around anyway.
Yeah.
Cool. And on to the next thing is the DuckDB setup. So,
Yeah. I'm excited for this.
yeah, it's
How does it work? How do I turn it on?
yeah. So all you have to do, so now there's a new flag. Actually, it's probably automatically on now for all of us because I haven't documented this flag. But there's this new flag, Dagster enable BigQuery.
So you
yeah.
have to turn that on.
So
for
in
BigQuery.
yeah, exactly. So by default, it uses DuckDB now. So when you start Dagster,
Can you show me real quick where that?
yeah.
the
So all of that.
control stick is?
Yeah. So oops, wrong one.
Wait, if it goes DuckDB first, like where does DuckDB even get the source data from?
Yeah. So okay. So there are some serious limitations with the DuckDB. So first of all, anything related to like our Gold Sky factories,
Yeah,
those aren't
not gonna happen. Yeah,
Those aren't going to work. So the only things that do work are DLT.
Yep.
And what is it? The data frames. Anything if you create a data frame, the IO manager is
Uh-huh.
configured for DuckDB.
So it's really meant for like people writing like
new stuff.
new stuff, connecting new data.
Correct.
It's not meant for any of the transformation or
Mm.
DBT stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
okay.
all of that, even though those get calculated right now, I just was trying to hack this together quickly. So those things still to run at the moment. Eventually, I can make those more optional, but
Okay.
yeah. So the logic for this, well, it kind of happens in two places. The first one is just gathering these, like enable BigQuery right here,
Mm-hmm.
and then ensuring that the Dagster home like environment variable exists. If not, it'll just use the directory of the repository and then create a .dagster localhost.
Oh, you moved it out of /temp. Was
Um,
this previously in /temp?
Sorry, it will still make its own /temp. So there's actually something wrong with this Dagster home setup here that I only found recently. But essentially, Dagster itself, because Dagster starts running before this environment variable gets set, it won't use this as its home. But Dagster home in this context, which I guess needs to be rewritten, is really only for the quote staging bucket, which may or may not be used by the DLT. That's for DLT.
Why not just leave it in /temp then?
Why move it into the local repository?
So we weren't ever creating the /temp. That was a Dagster thing. Like it'll create its own temporary directory and then shut itself down when you run Dagster dev. So
Okay, so it's not Dagster home then. This is
yeah,
actually
yeah,
the name
yeah,
of something else.
yeah. So it actually should be renamed.
Okay.
Yeah, it is what I discovered. I was actually thought that.
Did you add this stuff to the gitignore and .env example?
So I did not. I did not. I need to do that.
Okay.
I will
Yeah,
do that.
I feel like it
Yeah.
can be easy to not understand.
Yeah. And then the next thing after that is setting the local DuckDB path. So by default, it will just put itself into this thing that is currently called Dagster Home.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and that's how I was able to set up the DuckDB. So it will be consistent upon multiple runs of this.
Cool.
So that way it doesn't disappear on you. You can actually like query DuckDB if you need to. Yeah. So that's it. Well, that's not it. Sorry. Some of the factory stuff had to change. Like DLT is currently like in a hacky way, it's aware of whether or not we're using BigQuery. So because DuckDB can't use the staging area, so I actually just did that. This was a quick hack fix that I had to find. So I may actually just remove the staging area from the configuration entirely because it's not needed for DLT. It can't even be used by DLT DuckDB.
Okay. So you said this was like the hacky way, and you had like a longer fix that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so one of the things I started doing was this and it probably needs a better name, but like an early resources factory. So what that is it we maintain our own sort of like directed graph of the dependencies that that we configure at the top level for these definitions of assets or these like asset factories. And then that like our loading function for all of the assets will find all of those objects and then like trigger those for the essentially the lazy load of those asset factories. So because the normal asset factory is an eager load, and then the early one is a lazy load, basically the early resource, because it requires like some kind of external resource that it depends on. And so what I think I would do instead is have it depend on either a BigQuery existing or DuckDB existing, and then to like change the logic for some of these assets that maybe need like especially for like the Gold Sky stuff, like right now that just will error and just not show up. But I'd rather it just say, hey, okay, like not doing this for DuckDB, like have a
Is there an
user
issue for this?
There is not an issue for that one. No, I shouldn't write that.
Okay, I feel like I need to take notes because there's a lot of things that I'm gonna totally forget.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was like the Plasmic code to server side. There was the .git ignore and .n .example updates, and then there's what would you call this?
I would call this improve lazy loading of asset factories. That'll give me enough to
Okay,
know what to put into that issue.
all right, cool.
Cool. But yeah, those are the big things. There were some other like things that, that were accomplished this sprint, but those are the big ones.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's helpful.
Where's that?
You want to screen share, Carl?
I can. Also take questions if anybody has questions.
Yeah, I know we're moving quick.
All right. So the big focus the past couple weeks has actually been going from having a set of static metrics to time series metrics. So for those who are joining new, a static metric is basically looking at today how many stars a project has or how many contributors are active, and doing some kind of a time series analysis, such as how many new stars have been added over the past 6 months, or over a 3-month period, how many active developers have there been working on this project, or what's the total amount of unique users it has brought into a new network
For any period of time.
for any period of time. Yeah. So basically, some metric that you care about over an arbitrary period of time, and then ideally also being aggregated at various levels. So it could be aggregated at the most basic level, which we call an artifact. It could be at the project level. Or could ideally be at like a collection, which represents like a whole, maybe 10,000 different GitHub repos or a whole ecosystem of projects that are working. So that's been like the evolution. What we tried to do over the past couple of weeks was come up with like a kind of a series of steps that are required to transform raw data from our events table into a time series based metric. So basically the flow here is first you kind of pick the event data model that you want. In general, we have this like one really, really big model called int events, which has basically every possible type of event. So typically you start there, you do some kind of filtering based on the event type that you want. So maybe you care about gas fees or transactions or something else. So you only select those events. Then you might want to filter on specific types of artifacts. So it could be only looking at events that come from a trusted user, or it could be only commits from developers that have been active for a longer period of time, etc. So you can do some filtering on like the to and the from in the event table. And then the next step typically is to join that on some other table. So it could be you want to go from artifacts to projects, or you want to go from you want to have some user information. So effectively, you kind of grab the rectangle of data that you want from the events table. The next thing that we do is kind of apply the time series functions to it. So in most cases, you either want to aggregate things on a daily or monthly basis. Maybe in some cases, you care about like a year. And then depending upon how the metric is going to be calculated, there may be a need to fill in missing dates with a 0 value because we only capture when there is an event, but in some cases you might want to actually look at an entire series and have zeros for those days where there is no event happening. Then like you come to the the critical part of actually calculating the metric. So you decide where you want to group things. You apply whatever aggregations you want. In most cases, there's also a second level aggregation that's required in order to calculate, say, a rolling average, or some kind of a based on the interval that we care about. It could be every 6 months, every 3
Can
months.
you just actually walk through an example?
Yeah, I'm gonna show an example in a second.
Okay.
And then finally, you just kind of put some metadata around the metric, the name, and a specific unit of measure. So that's like the process. Here's a specific example. I picked a pretty simple one. This is actually just looking at gas fees totaled over a 6-month period. Let me just zoom in on that a little bit.
So it's a 6-month sliding window.
Yep, 6-month sliding window. It looks at gas fees. It looks at the following chains right now. So Optimism Base, Frax, Metal, Mode, Zora. This is literally just implementing a metric that we use for retrofunding for voting.
So these are
So-
parameters that get passed into a macro.
Yep, exactly. These are all parameters that go into a macro. This is the event type that we care about. We only want to look at events that are happening to a smart contract, originating either from an EOA or a safe. We basically defined our interval that we care about as 180-day or 6-month period. We don't care about missing dates, and we want to refresh this every day.
Wow, Carl has abstractions.
So yeah, that was like the dream, is to have a nice like abstracted version of this.
Nice.
And we're kind of a little bit in the middle in terms of how that's implemented. But basically, there's a macro where you can basically call, but by default, it will take like int events. You could be more specific if you wanted to override that. But you can, pass these variables in. It will send you back a filtered event model. And then you actually do the calculation. Here, it's very, very simple. We are literally just taking the total amount of gas fees and dividing it by, 10 to the 17th or so. And then that basically gives us the thing that we care about, which is the amount of L2 ETH. That's the unit that this is. So basically, you have here, this is for any given day in that series. Here's how much gas all of the smart contracts owned by that project contributed. The final step is that we actually need to apply the 6-month interval that we care about. So here, you kind of take the same data, and then we want to sum the amount of gas that has been created over a 180-day interval.
So, quick question.
Yeah.
The metadata on top.
Yep.
Where are you? Sorry, maybe I'm missing where that gets passed into the macro, but like,
Yeah.
where are you using most is this just metadata that you want to show up somewhere, or are you actually using this in the calculation somewhere?
No, we're using it in the calculation. So the macro basically takes all these things as parameters.
Oh, time series events.
Yeah. So there's a macro called time series events, basically.
I see.
Each of these
Different about
parameters.
each of these
Yep.
parameters. So you're not passing in the full config. This is just a convention that you want at the top
Yeah.
of every
So
model. But
we
then
should
you're
set
using
this
each,
as a config separately. That would be like the next step here.
but then you're using each individual parameter separately
Yes.
inside this. So
Yes.
I see. So that's why, like, this should this also work for contributor accounts? and
Yeah,
stuff like
it
that?
work for all these things. Yeah.
Because it wouldn't work. Because in the contributor one, you're not using against the event model, are you?
No, it'll work on that one as well. So if you take an example like trusted monthly active users, here you actually want to fill with zeros, but you still, send the request. You get back the event data that you care about. Then the aggregation is a bit more complicated here. So it needs to count the number of trusted user addresses, and there's like a separate join that happens to get to go from artifact to whether it's a trusted user or not. But it's effectively the same logic. The only thing that's different is previously we were summing an amount, and here we are ignoring the amount and creating a new one, which is based on the number of unique addresses that it's coming from. And then the same thing over here. Instead of doing a summation, we want to take an average over that 6-month period. That's why we need to fill it with zeros right now, is to make it so that you can get that average and reflect the days where there's no activity.
Mhm.
And then, you pass through the metadata and you have the metric. So that's like how the sausage is made. Coming out the other side,
Cool.
here's a preview of what we can do with this. I was hoping that we'd be able to materialize all of these metrics, but we're still running that. But the other thing that we did is create a set of events for funding events. So we've had this data that we've been collecting for some time.
Nice.
Whenever there's a grant that we've been tracking, we can identify who the grant went to, the foundation. We convert the currency into USD to keep things simple, and you can view that as an event. And so here's an example of
Quick
actually.
question.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that everything you've done so far can be computed time series metric that you have right now that wouldn't be computed from the event table?
The event model is the source of truth for everything.
Oh wow.
Like,
You're not finding that's not sufficiently expressive.
So there's kind of a longer conversation about, how if we want to have just like a very pure event model, and then we want to have like events that we create on top of that. So for example, like user becomes active, user becomes inactive. Those could be derived metrics derived events that we run on top of the underlying event model.
Right.
But so far we haven't done any of that. It's just kind of pure unadulterated.
Well,
rough
so there's derived events, which I think like you could create a downstream model from the event table to
Yes.
create a derived events table. But like, I'm wondering if there's things that are missing upstream of that. Like, you need more data from traces, or you need more data that's not actually reflected. in-
Yeah, like there's all sorts of things there. Yeah, that we could.
Yeah,
that we could
yeah,
add,
there
right?
there are new dimensions we could definitely add.
Yeah.
We were talking about that because I was saying like, well, there's a bigger magnification, for all of these things, like once we start adding some of those dimensions.
Yeah,
right?
give me an example of like something that we're missing right now, what we can't do without more, say, metadata around an event.
There's one that we've had on the docket for a while, which is how long it takes for an issue to have a comment on it from a maintainer. That's one where right now, all we have knowledge of is that someone created an issue. We don't know whether they responded to someone else's issue that already existed.
So a comment could be an event, but you actually need to tie that comment back to the actual issue,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, fair enough.
There's some other basic things, but I don't know if they're important. We don't also have like, for transactions, just like normal EOA transactions to another EOA, we don't have any
yeah,
of
we,
that
we
kind
don't,
of stuff.
we don't
right?
capture that exactly.
Like, any transfers of any form, we just don't.
Well, transfers can easily be an event.
Totally, yeah,
Yeah.
that's an easy one.
No, yeah. I'm saying, yeah, that's an easy one, but we just don't have those, and I'm just saying like that will explode the event
Mhm.
database. Like as it stands, the database is something like 150 gigs, which not bad. It's just
Yeah.
bigger.
So I've heard one pattern right now, which is like internal references. So
Right.
if an artifact is just the repo, and you still want to be able to reference a set of things related to that repo, like an issue. So you're
Right.
commenting on an issue. That's something that you wouldn't get in our current like schema. Transfers are easy because it's still
Very easy.
So
Yeah,
it's an
yeah.
event type that's artifact to artifact.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that's like that wouldn't be captured in the schema? Or is it just references, like internal references to an artifact?
I think that's probably the most generalized thing that's missing right
Cool.
now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to think about that. I think it's a good point.
I mean, kind of within that is the whole account abstraction stuff where there's like a user op. So a transaction
Yeah.
that we detect could be comprised of like 8 specific user ops that involve different parties, right? So we'd want to have.
But we can still derive that from other data that we would like. Yeah, I guess artifact related data. The
Yeah,
events. The
yeah.
events could still be used, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this leads into a discussion we should have at some point this week. I was telling Carl that the time series metrics are taking a long time on BigQuery.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking we should just
Split it up or partition it, or
either partition it or send it to ClickHouse. And
well, that's what I'm saying. Is like I see a world like I kind of already see this in my head that like long term, and I tell me if this like I want to understand whether or not I'm missing something here. But long term, I'm imagining like the event table being the boundary,
yes.
and then
Right.
everything pre-event table is in a lakehouse. It
Yeah.
doesn't even need to be in BigQuery. It
Exactly.
could just be like Spark over Delta
Yes.
tables.
Right.
Like that's cheaper and more scalable, et
Yes.
cetera. But you just have like giant lake houses of
Yes.
like data and transformations up to the event table. Then you pipe that event table into ClickHouse, and then
Yes.
you like
I like that.
like
This is-
everything
Yeah.
everything that you've built. I can already see like when SQL Mesh Metrics is actually shipped, which is not ready yet. Or everything that you've already done should fit into their paradigm once they've built it. They just haven't built it yet.
Right.
So this whole macro system that you've created, it's like, yeah, that's exactly how SQL Mesh
That's
works.
what it
So,
is,
so
yeah.
if
Yeah,
you have
yeah.
SQL Mesh in metrics in ClickHouse from the event table, can we rebuild all this stuff, in SQL Mesh? It seems like, yeah.
I mean, yeah. So that was exactly what I was suggesting. There's a good clear boundary now.
Yeah.
Like, we could maintain what we have with DBT for all the cleaning of, everything before the events table.
Yeah.
But everything after that, like, we
I mean,
could
it'll
really
be
start-
another giant refactor, but like,
But
I
it's
see
yeah.
a pathway to like I just want to make sure that I'm not missing like use cases that wouldn't be represented this way, right? Like, is there actually narrow ways where
Right.
there's that clear boundary, or will like if there are use cases that require spanning between two systems where the downstream stuff from events is missing metadata that needs to be pulled from something about raw traces or something about like
I mean, I think maybe a good way to do this would be to look at the graph of all of the
model
all
that
the
you're making
models
now.
and see which
Yeah,
ones
definitely.
rely on any of the staging models, right?
Mhm.
Because like
Anything
there-
that's touching staging is probably just because we haven't made the right.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and that's just it, right? Like I think that's also my hunch is if there is anything touching staging, it's just because we did, it was either laziness or
Yeah.
we just didn't do something.
All right, I'm gonna jump back in.
Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry for that little interlude.
No, this is exciting. This is cool.
But
Questions are because we're excited.
here's a very quick proof of concept. I feel like my weeks are basically spent 2 weeks doing some really like menial work in DBT and stuff like that, and then I jump out, and for 30 minutes I have this like great
Cool
moment,
graphic.
right? I make a visualization and stuff like that,
Nice.
and that's this one. So this is basically just a quick demo of some of these time series metrics using Hex. Obviously, the same functionality will be on the OSI website very, very soon, as Ruben was showing earlier. But basically here, what this pulls in is both the funding metrics as well as a few of the time series developer related metrics. Again, right now it's very simple. It's just like full-time developers, part-time developers, and then active developers, which is full-time plus part-time developers. But what you can do is you can select a bunch in here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, probably, I don't know, 800 or so projects in there.
So Colab doesn't have these widgets, is what's I'm missing, right?
Yeah, I suppose you could probably, there are some like interactive notebooks and stuff, but
Yeah.
for like shipping an app, this is kind of a nice way of doing that. Then you have these like, text boxes and
You'd
stuff.
have to find some kind of pit package that you could use to replace this functionality.
Yeah, there's something called like iPie widgets, which I've used before, which is fine. Anyway, this is like 30 minutes, so that's why it's nice. It was very
Yeah.
easy to pull together. You can set a time period. So I just like hard coded these at 6 months, a year, 3 years, and then you can compare two metrics over time. And so just looking at our own project, Open Source Observer, for the grants that we've tracked, you can see how much funding we've received.
How far are we from plotting grant events or cumulative grants on the same graph?
We could. I just need to make a metric for cumulative grants because right now it doesn't look good because
Yeah.
it hasn't been normalized. So you'll basically just see
It's like discrete, like
it's a discrete
Spikes or
one
something.
event, and so
Yeah.
it's gonna just mess this whole thing up. So, one big
okay.
event.
So it's a step function.
Yeah, and we need to have a secondary y-axis, which I don't think you can actually have in Hex. Anyway, silly stuff, but like it'll be easy to fix.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you can see, yeah, this type of thing. I think it's also cool let's take a project that's been around longer. Like,
Is there any relationship? Like that's what I'm trying to figure out is when we end up doing these things, is there any relationship to this bump from the funding? Probably not, right? Because like if we're looking at ourselves, the reason why this bump exists is because of like the retro funding,
right.
like event marketing, as opposed to
Yep.
like our funding,
Yep.
right?
Here's the P2P going all the way back to, I don't like the date thing here, it doesn't show the year. But this is going back all the way to 2015. So you can
Cool.
just see like the whole history of that project. And again, what's cool about this is basically, capturing the number of full-time developers, right? So it's actually a pretty good over a, I guess, 6-month period here. 30-day period. So it's actually like a pretty robust metric that's going to really give you a sense of how the product has evolved. And whether it's in this case it's been pretty constant. And you can see obviously that projects slow down around the holiday period in December, and then there's like periods of time where they're all more active. And I guess that kind of leads us to the last thing that we put out just earlier today. There's a future that we see where we kind of go from having many ecosystems begin with having no metrics. It's fairly straightforward to start having sub-metrics like stars and transactions and gas fees and so on. What we've been experimenting with more recently is the idea of these like time series or longitudinal metrics, so that you can see one thing over a period of time. The next level is going to be metrics allow you to compare a product's performance over a period of time against the baseline. And so you can say, is this project really good relative to the average on any metric or suite of metrics that you care about. And there's a stat in baseball called WAR, which stands for wins above replacement, which is basically doing this. So it's trying to capture both like the offensive and the defensive characteristics of a player, and then compare them to every other player in the league or the period of time. And so what you can do is see not only that project's value, but over time you can compare teams, you can compare seasons, you have some way of kind of controlling for all these other factors, and identifying if performance is really significantly above the replacement value or like the average at that time.
Cool.
So it's a cool metric. I think that here kind of sketched out two examples of how you could take a WAR type formula and apply it to protocols and to OSS projects. So one example, maybe I should open this in another tab. Again, this is a very simple example for a protocol, just to get the idea going, is that you have something like daily active users, then you have retain users, those being two like offensive metrics, two positive things, and then maybe you want to have a defensive metric, which would represent like hacked users, and obviously you want to have a low value on that one. Then depending upon the category that you're in, so like social consumer apps will have many more users per day than a DeFi app because typically you're trying to get people to engage more regularly. So you can make these types of adjustments, and then you could have another adjustment based on whether that project is just on one chain versus on all the chains. And then to give it some kind of comparison to a baseline, perhaps you might take the number of peer-to-peer ETH transfers that are happening on that network. I saying, okay, in the absence of any utility here, here's like the basic amount of simple, transfers that might be happening.
Just to check, you probably want to normalize the offensive and defensive metrics, right? So
all of these get normalized.
Like the daily active users you want to go up, but hacked users you want to go down, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you'd want the inverse of that or something like that?
Yeah. So like even the way the baseball formulas are set up, like it looks deceptively simple, but they're actually it's not just batting runs. You don't just like drop the number of runs.
Mhm.
There are some normalizations, and I think in some cases they take like a log function and so on to account for those types of things.
Got it.
In any case, it looks simpler than it is. It's actually a fairly sophisticated model. But the output of that is that you're able to have these like normalized scores, which hold up across team, project, network, over time, etc.
Mhm.
And so you could really compare, here's a grant round, here's how it performed relative to all the other grant rounds, or to the baseline network activity across all of Ethereum over this time period. Those are the types of things that you can do. So that's basically, the next generation advanced metrics. After that, there's probably something like, super advanced where you have AI agents that are, working on these, but like, I think that's like the exciting future that I see a year from now. So the post is out. If you have any feedback or ideas for how to implement this, we'd love to hear from anyone. Yeah, that's it. I guess any questions? That was a lot of stuff as well. Glad to see Matt here. I'm sure he's a big War fan.
No.
Right, over to you, Ray.
Cool. I don't have a ton to demo because I took some time off and then I was at DWeb and then I have like in progress stuff. I guess like the only palpable thing to show would just be like the job post.
All right. Ship the job post.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's in our docs. Like I think you can just apply straight through our docs now, which is kind of nice.
Docs.
But yeah. Do you have any other questions? Is there anything else you want to discuss?
Yeah, I think that's everything from our side.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. This will be up on YouTube. Thanks, Bree, for helping with that. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.